Yes, welcome to a new episode of our Bikeschmiede Geschichten. Today we are going to touch a bit on the topic of Simson, which not only held a significant place in motorcycle and moped history back then, but is also still a big name on the streets of our republic today. And here we have the original Simpsons, developed and built in the early years in the GDR. So they started with this Simson SR, which was then called Suhl and Rheinmetall. So the mopeds were built in Suhl, and Rheinmetall was the company that manufactured the engines. And here we have this Simson SR, which had slightly larger wheels and a nice rider on the front fender. And from this moped, approximately 2,000 units were built from 1955 to 1957. And then they developed it a bit further and brought the Simson SR to the market. And these were the mopeds that were produced in significantly larger quantities and were also extremely popular. So a trailer hitch was also installed here. Usually still with a cart, a rubber cart attached behind, and one could wonderfully transport their belongings back and forth with such a small moped. Yes, and here we have 3 such Simpsons of the type SR. They were available in 3 to 4 color variants. Once in this gray, then there was also marron, then there was also Bordeaux and Burgundy. And here we have one of those gray color variants. Yes, and from these extremely popular mopeds, which I must say were built almost 1 million times back then. We would like to introduce you to 2 vehicles in more detail today. Yes, and here we have 2 Simson SR vehicles, each with a wonderful story that you only experience once in a lifetime. The vehicles are therefore almost exactly the same type as the Simson SRE, which was actually intended for export, but was also available for purchase in the GDR. Here we have one. The vehicles have both been at home in the same place for many years and have thus led different lives. One had a wonderful experience, while the other was neglected, and you can always see this clearly in these 2 vehicles. The one here who had the beautiful life belonged to a master painter. He had a large workshop of his own, and we knew him quite well. We were allowed to paint our vehicles in his booth during the first years, but he still didn't want to part with the moped at that time. His son was also an apprentice with him back then, and he was still out and about with this moped. When it was parked, it always stood in his office next to the desk, which is why it still looks so nice. So we have the year of manufacture. 1960 here, which was just a transition year, where the swing arm was changed. They made the change here. The swing arm here at the front was previously made of rubber in the fork, and it was later improved here with a spring. That means a spring was inserted here, and the entire joint rotated here on the axis. And from that perspective, the spring travel was of course much better balanced and also much better tuned to the rider's weight. Yes, there were a few small changes, like the speedometer and so on, but I don't want to go into that right now. We want to focus more on telling the history of these vehicles. And as I said, this moped was always polished. You can see that wonderfully in the paint. It is in burgundy here, as stated in the operating manual. And you can also see these wonderful decorative lines, which are all beautifully and excellently preserved on this moped here. They were applied back then with a so-called drag brush. It was a brush that was about 5 to 8 centimeters long, approximately 3 centimeters wide at the top, tapering to a point at the bottom. And when you dipped it in color, you had large reserves of paint in the brush at the top allowing you to draw a line smoothly without having to reload the brush. Yes, and this is still wonderfully preserved on this vehicle. It is quite rare to find it in this condition. And of course, it has only just under 7,000 kilometers on it, and has probably been sitting in his office for about 25 years without being used. And he had called back then, when he closed his paint shop, asking if we had the vehicle, because it was known that it would be in good hands with us. And then we picked it up back then, and now it has, of course, found a nice place for itself in our museum. And I want to show you once again how such a moped still starts reliably after all this time. And, well, with this one, you wouldn't really expect anything else. One can surely imagine, as mentioned, these mopeds were very, very, very popular in the GDR. So many people bought these mopeds. They cost around 800 marks new back then. And they usually had a non-standard feature where a cable pull was added, allowing them to attach their rubber bags well and transport sacks and all sorts of things with these vehicles. Yes, let's see if we can coax a few sounds out of this stylish vehicle today. Look how nice it stands here in Burgundy. All clean. I could also take a ride around the house again. Let's see if it works. It has a solid 2-speed transmission. 2-speed manual transmission. That means you have the clutch. Down for the first gear, up for the second, the throttle on the side, and here you have the regular turn signal and horn. Let's see if it works. Simply great. It feels like a deja vu because the moped was also my first moped. So when I was 14 years old, I built my first moped myself, and that was an SR, which the father of a friend actually wanted to take to the junkyard. And we picked it up back then, put it in our workshop, and then painted it nicely in bright colors, as was the fashion during GDR times. So they made the mopeds quite stylish and colorful, added a nice cross handlebar, and then modified the whole thing a bit before riding it for 3 years. Yes, you kind of assume that the moped runs, especially since it looks almost brand new. It's quite different with this vehicle. As mentioned, they both had to endure different fates. One must say in this case, one stood for years in the warm office of the master, and the one here stood almost 25 years uncovered in a garden. The previous owner unfortunately also used the spark plug for his lawnmower tractor and unscrewed it. And we found the moped back then, as I said, in the same place where we got the other moped. And we took it to the workshop, tipped it on its side, and half a cup of water ran out of the cylinder. Then we carefully loosened the piston again with a bit of oil. And here too we could all do a sustainability check together. Oh. And if, after a certain period of time, the lights at the front and back are also working properly, and the signal horn functions in use, then I believe the designers and engineers at Simson have done everything right. For instance, so a few years ago, it's been 5 years now, we had Rüdiger König here, who, in his younger years, after obtaining his engineering degree, applied to Simson in 2001 and said, "Man, I would really like to do something with you." And the management said, "Okay, we have just launched this moped on the market. If you have a buddy, you can test the mopeds thoroughly together for us." Yes, he has a Joy, which is quite a cool thing. Behind the workshop, maybe a small area where we can ride around a bit on the mopeds, and in between, enjoy sipping a cup of coffee. What was supposed to be the greatest adventure of their lives. prescribed route from the factory across 3 continents, through 33 countries. Incredible kilometers. They were on the road for almost 2 years and did not have any significant breakdowns with their mopeds. Except for when they crossed the Sahara, they experienced breakdowns 15 times in the hot desert sand, then switched to Heidenau tires, and ultimately conquered the Sahara in 2001 with these brilliantly simple vehicles. And he also took some photos during his journey, during his spectacular trip, and he has provided us with a few of them exclusively. We brought them along for you. Yes, it was quite a long journey. February 21, 1960. The departure. 2 daring men with their vehicles, slightly modified, large saddlebags, a stylish windshield, the world map on the saddle, took one last look, and then off they went, full speed ahead. Thin air, snow, cold, through the swamps and moors of Asia with the Simson moped. A little chat by the roadside, and amazed looks from the indigenous people of Africa. Ships, pyramids, sleeping in the desert, in the Sahara, on the mopeds. And then, after 2 long years and incredible kilometers, they finally arrived at the equator and proudly lifted the moped for the photo of their lives. Heroes, right? Yes. And he also wrote a very thick book about his journey, which is titled With the Moped Through Africa, and can sometimes be auctioned for a lot of money on eBay. We had invited him to our festival back then and digitized his photos, which were amazing. He stood proudly at the front of our stage. The barn was full of visitors, completely silent. And at 86 years old, he recounted his incredible journey with fire in his eyes. Afterwards, we went to him and expressed our gratitude. We also have all these mopeds in our group, and when the opportunity arises, we go for a little fun ride together. Coincidentally, we were in Drosa near Köthen for the Simson SR meeting 2 weeks before his presentation. And then we proudly approached him with puffed chests and said, "Man Master, we've already come quite a long way with our mopeds. 100 kilometers, we were on the road for 6 hours. He patted me on the shoulder and said, "Man boy, you really need to learn how to ride those things properly." So it was not an acceptable or reasonable route for him at all. Yes, that's enough about these robust Simson vehicles. Even today, 30 years later, it is still omnipresent in road traffic. The entire youth is crazy about it. Why? Because they have 3 things. They are brilliant, simply built, timelessly beautiful, and they are also fast. It's a pity that we didn't succeed. Just like with MZ, there was a bit of a capitalist approach involved, but we have many vehicles on the road, and I believe that future generations will definitely keep the cult around these brands alive for many more years to come. Yes, that's it for these vehicles for now. In the next part, we will also introduce all the exclusive custom builds that emerged during the GDR era. So the mopeds have also been modified multiple times, and small cars and tricycles have been built, which we will present to you again in one of the upcoming films. Among other things, the only Yuzen diesel SR2, which I believe exists in this world, is equipped with the vibrating plate engine. So, all such special things. If you like it, just subscribe to this channel, and then see you next time. Rock and roll.